Welcome to Meadowlarkers 27, Legacy. Our usual team of Kate Fagan and Amin El-Hassan are here. I'm Howard Bryant, and things are happening. Samantha Brunell, the Virginia native who played 3 years at Notre Dame, announced she's transferring back home to the University of Virginia. Meanwhile, Dabo Swinney, the Clemson football coach, says the new college transfer portal is, quote, out of control, end quote, and that the big losers of athletes having control over their collegiate careers and the ability to monetize them will be the athletes themselves. Sweeney, by the way, is scheduled to make $8.5 million in 2022. The Brooklyn Nets and their super team shattered weeks ago when James Harden was traded to Philadelphia, and now the two remaining members, Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant, must survive a play-in game against Cleveland to stay alive. Another super team, the Los Angeles Lakers, owned and operated by LeBron James and Clutch Sports, didn't even make the playoffs. And their coach, Frank Vogel, they fired him. If these happenings are seemingly disparate, they owe their roots to the same place. They are in part the legacy of July 8th, 2010, the day of the decision, when James announced in a nationally televised special he was leaving Cleveland to join the Miami Heat. In the 12 years since, the player has only increased their power. Player control, name, image, likeness, they're all byproducts of one long, hard fight that far predates James. Shout out to Spencer Hayward and Ed O'Bannon. But it has come to fruition during a time when player agency has become more acceptable. The tilting opened up the transfer portal, shrinking the gap between college coaches being able to bolt while players had to wait a year to transfer. Even the college player now has a say. James's Miami super team has seen many ringless imitations, and the disasters in Brooklyn and Los Angeles suddenly feel like a cautionary tale of unintended consequences, making now a perfect time to reflect on the sports world created, at least in part, by the decision. Welcome to Meadowlarkers 27, and we are not going to mangle the word legacy. This time we're actually going to use it properly, and what it's supposed to mean, which is the byproduct of what is left behind, what is the actual legacy of something, the fruit of a given moment. And this moment is the decision. From the intro, Kate, let's start with you. I was thinking about this. So Dabo Swinney says that the portal is chaos, that there's, quote, no rules, no guidance, it's out of control, end quote. But if you look at someone's injuries like, the injuries that Samantha Brunell had, the fact that Muffet McGraw leaves, isn't this a great opportunity for her to have a start that she wouldn't have had 10 years ago?
Yeah, I think the portal has different impacts on sports depending on what the variables at play in that sport already were. In reading Dabo Swinney's comments, and perhaps we'll get to some of them, there's a lot that he says within those comments about the portal and the chaos and the ramification on athletes that there was a lot of value in those. But my point looking at the college portal and the impact it might have is oftentimes through the lens of female athletes in women's sports. And I have been noticing over the last couple of weeks that, there was at least two specific transfers in particular of kids who had left their home state, played a couple years somewhere, and then announced that they were transferring back to their hometown school. One was to UVA, and the one you mentioned also was back to Indiana, to IU. And it got me thinking about the legacy of the decision and how I see it reflected so clearly in something like these decisions by women's college basketball players. One, because they're very clearly articulating in their decision that they were young and they wanted that ability to go prove themselves elsewhere and get time in a different city just to see who they were. But then also, once they had that experience, also felt the pull of being able to come home around friends and family and play in an arena that no doubt you went to, like elite camps, and you knew the coaching staff and all that. And before the college portal was set up this way, there was no chance to have those dual experiences in your college experience. And so I think for women's basketball in particular, I think the college portal is going to contribute to a lot more parity, because you can say I'm going to leave because I need to go play for a Notre Dame, a Tennessee, a South Carolina, or a UConn, or it's bust. And now you can kind of say I had that experience, and now I'm going to go enrich my local community, my local school, in a way that I don't think that I definitely would not have been able to, 3-4 years ago. And that, to me, that is very much grounded in the legacy of LeBron's The Decision. A lot of that player empowerment and that leaving home as a kid and then coming back. And I think you're seeing it reflected, whatever we're now 12 years later.
Yeah, it's control in some ways. It's in some ways it's ring chasing, and then I'm going to make my decisions, and I'm going to go do what's best for me in some ways. When you think about this, when you think about if you can take your mind back, to 2010, when not only does LeBron leave, and everyone knew at that point he was leaving. I don't think there was a great deal of, it was just a matter of where, what was it going to look like?
Some folks in Cleveland might disagree, but
some people in Cleveland might disagree. I didn't think he was staying, and I remember that after the Celtics had beaten them, I just thought that there was something else out there for him. But when he did leave, and making the TV show out of it and the whole thing, 12 years later, it does look like a watershed moment. Even though the type of movement had happened before, it didn't happen quite in this way. And to what Kate's talking about, it's the player making a decision for personal reasons that are no longer hamstrung by the structure. The structure has been broken.
So this is the interesting thing about this conversation. We talk about the decision as this watershed moment for player empowerment in terms of where I want to play. But it is one of a long line of things that has happened in history. You go back to Spencer Haywood challenging the basically the ability of the league to stop him from earning a living.
Yeah, the hardship case.
Right. You go back before that, Kurt Flood, free agency. The concept that I can, when my contract is up, I can choose to play where I want to play. Why am I beholden to my former employer? Like, these are all kind of watershed moments of player control and where they want to play. As I always like to point out, it didn't start with LeBron or James Harden forcing his way out or whatever. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar famously walked into the Bucks front office after they won a championship, and he was great and won MVPs, and said, New York or LA, you pick one. I'm not living in Milwaukee anymore. So we've had all that. But I think what the decision did was something different, and which was I am going to monetize the attention that I attract, right? It's one thing for LeBron to say, I'm leaving Cleveland. I'm going to tell you who I'm going to pick after the break right here on ESPN. That's one thing. That's fine. If it had been an ESPN show, he'd done it on The Jump or on SportsCenter or whatever. That's no different than kids that we show right now. Kids with the hats on the table, Alabama, Florida State, and wherever else, USC, and then I put on the Alabama hat. Like, we do this and we cherish it and we celebrate it, right? What's the difference? The difference is, rather than LeBron saying, I'm gonna come on your show and put 3 hats on the table, he said, I'm gonna own the show, I'm gonna own the programming, I'm going to sell it to you, we're gonna sell ads off it, and then I'm going to take that money, I'm going to donate the proceeds to the Boys and Girls Club. And what that I believe was a watermark moment, because they left, just, hey, I got something to tell. Do you want to carry this for me? And said, look, I have a television show. I'm going to, since I know whatever ratings you attract are going to be based off of me and nothing else, then I deserve to own control of the lion's share of revenues built off of that. That, to me, is a watershed moment, much like Ed O'Bannon was a watershed moment.
Yes, all the above. But I think it's that and more. It's not just the monetizing of the television event, but the other thing about the decision was the decision took the decision of team building out of the hands of the general manager and put it into the hands of the players. They manipulated what that team roster was going to look like, right? That's a big deal. Now, they did this in a lot of ways, not completely on their own, because then the dollars had to add up, but for players to essentially manipulate, because it's not tampering because they're free agents.
Right.
And so to do that, that was a big deal. And I also think the other piece of the decision, and you're right, when we're really talking about legacy, the decision is part of the legacy as well. Didn't start with them. It goes all the way back. It goes back to the formation of a players association back in 1946 in baseball, which was a club and it didn't work, obviously. It goes all the way back to the Negro Leagues, where you had Satchel Paige jumping teams left and right and deciding who I was going to play for. I'll decide who I'm going to play for. And then the league banned him. He says, okay, I'll go play in Mexico and I'll make more money down there than I make here. And so this is part of a century-old legacy of player control. But the one thing that I do think is different about this, where I do think it began with the decision, is the world around it. Those players were outlaws. Curt Flood was an outlaw. Spencer Haywood was an outlaw. Bill Willoughby was an outlaw. Daryl Dawkins was an outlaw. Moses Malone was, Moses Malone didn't come to the NBA. He went to the ABA. And so every step of this battle previously was really met with a lot of hostility from the establishment. In this period that we're in now, people seem to get it. Yeah, the players should have this control. And if Samantha Brunell wants to go home, why can't she go home? And if Muffet McGraw quit, then the reason why she went there is no longer there. She should have the opportunity to go. If Bobby Petrino wants to get into a car crash with his girlfriend on the back of his motorcycle and then leave and go to the Atlanta Falcons, or however he did it, whichever order that was, then the players who came to that school because he recruited them and said, don't worry, son, I'm going to be here all 4 years right by your side, right? They should have the opportunity to go have some more control as well. So the climate around this generation is very different than previous. Kate?
Yeah, I think, the most probably repeated cliche is just timing is everything. And I think when we talk about the legacy of the decision, and we're all pointing out moments in history going back, Howard, as you laid out, nearly 100 years, we have so many instances of players flexing some kind of power, and what political social climate around it maybe isn't exactly where it is. And then, as you said, Howard, we have this moment in 2010 where there's a different feeling about what LeBron is going to do. And then this very clear change, which is social media, so that not only is LeBron flexing his power over, GMs and his power within this league, he also, whether knowingly or not knowingly, is about to embark on a decade where even more power of storytelling and ability to monetize is going to be pouring in.
And now, ownership of the platforms.
And ownership of all of that. Maybe we could say, obviously, the legacy of that, as Amin pointed out, is like I don't know if it's the first, but it's a pretty glaring example of players realizing they can be their own storytellers in a way that they never had before. And the last thing I'll say about this mashup is of this moment in time, with also social media about to change the dynamics of storytelling, is, maybe later on in this pod we can deconstruct the effects of the decision. Because if you look at, the effects of Facebook are not the effects that Facebook thought they would be. And the effects of the decision probably are not necessarily the effects LeBron thought they might be, if he was even considering the long-term effects of them.
Well, that's the hilarity of the word legacy. When a guy goes out and scores 30 points, he's in an interview and says, I'm just trying to cement my legacy. Legacy's out of your control. You have no idea how this is going to manifest years down the line.
The funny thing is, I wanted to address the concept of the player as the roster builder. I kind of feel like that's a red herring. That's not real. That is a hysteria, not unlike the hysteria that was created by Birth of a Nation, talking about Reconstruction, like the idea of if you let them do this, you're gonna have people eating chicken in Congress and all that. I don't like LeBron. Yes, LeBron and Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh colluded to end up playing on the same team. As it worked out, Miami was the only one that had the wherewithal to sign them all outright without having to deal with a lot of messiness. But outside of that, Miami pretty much ran the thing as they wanted to.
Yes, but you're talking about two different things. You're talking about the effect of if these players do it. And I didn't suggest at all that it was going to be hysteria. I'm saying that it happened, that these guys did manipulate playing together. And normally that role had been left to the GMs. Even, and like when people go, well, the Miami Big Three is not really the original Big Three. What about the Celtics? Well, the Celtics didn't manipulate, the players didn't really manipulate that.
What about Mark Aguirre going to the Pistons?
Mark Aguirre going to the Pistons was not a free agent. It was not a three-way free agent thing.
Sure. I mean, like, I feel like in some way there is a level of semantic there, like whether a guy signed or whether a guy was traded. The idea was there was an acquisition made, and a big part of the acquisition was the personal relationship between the star player and the other star player, right? That
true, and forcing your way, right? And you can
exactly.
Guys have forced their way out of places for forever.
Right, and where it ends up is also kind of influenced by who's on the other side of that. But I think people take the decision and turn it into kind of what we see with LeBron in a lot of situations. Like, well, LeBron handpicked this roster. Well, no, he didn't. He didn't handpick the roster. If a general manager asks him, hey, what do you think? That's very different from saying, get him, and get him. People said that about what he did in Cleveland. I said, he wasn't out here talking about, we need to get Channing Frye and Richard Jefferson. He definitely made his displeasure known in terms of like, don't like playing for this coach, or, I don't think we have enough. And then the front office does what it does. But like, people like to frame it in this way in an attempt, I feel like, to make us be scared of this world where players are just doing whatever they want. And in sometimes life imitates that art, where there are franchises that do let their players do whatever they want. And that, honestly, I think always ends in disaster. But the reality is, I don't think player control in terms of where you want to play is as disastrous a thing as the general public makes it out to be.
Yes, but once again, you and I aren't saying the same thing. I didn't say it was disastrous. I just said it's happening. I mean, the player is, yes, as influential.
I don't think it's as influential as some would make it out to be.
Yeah, I mean, it may or may not be. I mean, but I think that I actually think it is. I think it has been. I think that, to what your point, where we may be disagreeing on this, is the root of the influence. The root of the influence is not what is post-decision. The root of the influence is the guaranteed contract. That the minute the player started to have that much control over the coach, where the imbalance began to grow and grow and grow, you're doomed. And at some point, and so what we're really talking about is different star systems over the course of the last generation, where, I mean, Magic Johnson got Paul Westhead fired, right? I mean, we have seen all of this take place over the last 40 years. But the one area that I do think is significant here is, now that you've got a really hard, it's not a hard cap, but now that you've got a dollar for dollar cap, and now that you have chosen, these teams have chosen, and it makes sense that they've chosen this, but you're going to have an extremely top-heavy roster when you try this method. When you try this, like, I remember one time back in 2000, I think, the horrible Detroit Tigers, bad team, they had something like 70% of a 25-man roster tied up in 3 guys. Yeah. I mean, that really does change what your team's going to look like. So whether or not we're going to say LeBron is hand-picking guys, the bottom line is that if the organization decides to go into this super team mode, you are going to have a very, very top-heavy, super team-oriented roster. Okay.
Well, I have a question for you, Amin, as among the three of us, clearly the most insight into the backroom machinations of the NBA. When I was thinking about this topic and the decision not being the first of its kind, but timing-wise being the landmark that we think of that's leading to these super teams and players, whether through the GM or through their own relationships, forcing themselves onto teams together, I do wonder whether we are past our prime on that model. In the same way, books are always my comparison, where it's like, okay, Harry Potter's big, the next Wizard book probably going to do pretty well, and then a couple years later you just got shitty knockoffs of Harry Potter. Same with Twilight. Twilight spawns 50 Shades of Grey, and then you get to this point where people are trying to do this thing that struck it big. They're swinging for the fences, but really the world has pivoted. And what we need then is like the first person who makes the next pivot is going to be the one who sets the course for whatever the next blueprint is in the NBA. Because when the decision happened, everyone was saying, oh, LeBron is breaking the Michael Jordan blueprint of how to win titles. And now LeBron is creating this new blueprint. So it's like, well, so what's the next blueprint for the NBA? Is it kind of like going back to like local, rosters that you're trying to build chemistry rather than like star power?
No, the blueprint has never changed. The blueprint has never changed. It's how do you arrive at that is what's changed, right? Or what's been evolving. But in terms of, I want star players. Like, no disrespect to Howard and his love for the Celtics, but Bird, Parrish, and McHale weren't the first big three in NBA history. Jerry West, Elgin Baylor, and Wilt Chamberlain played on the same team. Bill Russell and name any 7 Hall of Famers all played on the same team. This game has always been the same.
Why are you putting that on me?
I'd like, you're an easy scapegoat.
I don't know, you Boston.
I was going to be like, why? When did I say that Bird, Parrish, and McHale were the original big three? You go the 69 Lakers. You're just messing, right? You're just messing. But you know what is funny about that though, is that the NBA is unique. The NBA is the most, football people might argue because of the importance of the quarterback position, but the NBA is a true best player wins league. Truly. Right? I mean,
yes.
There is no other sport where if you have that guy, you have the greatest advantage of any other sport.
Right.
Even quarterbacks. Now, the beauty of greatness, one of the things I love about greatness is that if you think about the greatest players of every sport, of all topics, genres, genders, whatever, the best players always play for at least one championship because they're that good. That's how good they are, right? There are very few players who are at that level who at some point don't get there and play for a title. Winning a title, little bit different story, but most of them eventually get there. But if you're in basketball, because it's a two-way sport, if you've got one of those guys, to your point, Kate, that blueprint never changes. I think I can probably count on one hand in the NBA, in the history of the sport. I think whenever I do this, I think I get to 4 teams where the ensemble cast actually wins a championship.
Right.
Like,
right.
Right.
There just
the
aren't that
Pistons
many.
Of 2000, whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The 04 Pistons, the 79 Supersonics. Some people like to throw the Dallas Mavericks in there in 2011 because Jason Kidd wasn't Jason, but he still had Dirk. I mean, I don't know if I would call that an ensemble cast.
I wouldn't, because Dirk was clearly one of the.
He was the
players.
dude, right?
He
was an
MVP. He was
exactly.
No, the Bullets of night like 78 or whatever.
78. They had 2 Hall of Famers on that team.
Wow.
Unseld and Hayes.
Another conversation about what's Unseld Hall of Fame. Another episode of Meadowlarkers. But the point is, first of all, you're right, Howard, and it's simple math. Basketball is a sport that has the least amount of players on the floor. So the impact of one individual when there are 10 guys on the floor is much greater than one in, I guess in baseball would be 1 versus 9.
Well, and no division of labor. So if you've got a two-way player, they're controlling both ends of the court.
Exactly.
Unlike,
So
it's maybe some. Go ahead, Amin. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was gonna say when you said star quarterback, Howard, the one thing it made me think of is, okay, maybe not the blueprint of what you need to win, but the economics of winning. That's where it gets interesting. So in the case of quarterback, I have a very rough unofficial theory that every time I run it by football, people are like, oh, you might be right. I need to actually sit down and do my research, so to speak. But it seems to me the way to win in the NFL is not to just have a great quarterback, but to have a great quarterback on a discount. That if you're paying your quarterback market value, by the economics, it is impossible to build a Super Bowl contending or a Super Bowl championship team. If you look back at how many Super Bowl winners in a row, you can always say, oh, that quarterback was this good, but they were only paying him this much.
Well, which is why
whether
Tom
it's a guy on a
Brady
rookie
was the
scale-
guy taking
Yep.
discounts every year, and the union was pissed off at him because it's like, you're the best quarterback in the game. You should be setting the standard. Why are you taking these under market deals every year? It was to win.
Right.
Yep.
And so similarly in the NBA, I would say that if you are front loading or top loading your salary, not necessarily the talent. Talent is talent. I want all the talent I can get. But if I'm paying market value, then it makes it so that every other player on this roster that I get, I'm getting on a ridiculous threadbare discount, which means either they're old or there's something wrong with them or there's some reason why would a perfectly good player accept minimum or a mid-level exception when they're worth so much more versus when my star player is on some sort of discount, like we saw with Steph Curry due to his ankles. He signed a weird extension that was way below market value, whether it's because my player is so good, he's on a rookie scale like John Morant and the Memphis Grizzlies this year. I think that's the part where the blueprint of the strategy is evolving as the economics evolve.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe some of what we're talking about here too is the way the storytelling around what has happened has shifted. Because like we seem to be saying, going back to predating Howard's Celtics, but all the way back to the Lakers, that this is how things have been done. The blueprint has always been the same. So in a lot of ways, the decision was a landmark storytelling event more than anything. Because I feel like after in the decade plus since, our storytelling around how these teams are formed are very much driven by like, you know, the banana boat and they're out in the, you know, they're out on vacation together, and like all of that storytelling around these guys it has shifted from a competitive environment to a superstar camaraderie driven environment. Maybe that is what will start shifting now when you look at teams that maybe don't have that same setup, like say the Celtics right now, where you don't feel like that's the storytelling isn't a bunch of people have pushed their way to the Celtics to, for this iteration of the team to like form a superpower.
Well, I think what it is, and I think that both narratives are true. I don't think it's overblown, however, because I think that the GMs in the sport, I think they all recognize the dynamic of the NBA, that you have to have one of these players. And that not only is it, and I think Amin is right as well when he's talking about the economics of it, because the numbers are so big that it was, that you have to pay somebody. And the guy that you're paying may not be in that tier of championship level player, but he's getting championship level player money. Mm-hmm. So therefore, just because you're maxing out a guy doesn't mean that guy is a superstar level Hall of Fame NBA championship level player. So what the game is trying to manipulate the money and to manipulate the relationships in the recognition that it's really that player is a real scarcity. How many players?
How do you feel about that, right? Like, just to stay on that point for a second, when you have a world in the NBA in which, whatever free form, to use that Dabo Sweeney quote here, like whatever free form of capitalism, right? Like capitalism. The NBA isn't really capitalism in any respect. And, you really don't have any opportunity now to pay Russell Wilson money. You got a rookie quarterback who's playing like an elite quarterback, but he's making, $1 million or something for a couple years. And you don't really anymore have the Scottie Pippen contract where you're seriously underpaying somebody for like a long stretch of time. So how do we feel about what that means for the NBA? I mean, if you've got a bunch of guys making what seems max level money, but they're max level players, like, then that has a trickle down effect.
The worst thing that happened in the NBA is a max contract, because it set a standard that if I achieve a certain amount, not the maximum amount of greatness, but a certain amount of greatness, I reach that threshold, I get paid that much. It does not differentiate between me and the guy who far surpassed. So there are players who are probably max players in terms of, if the max is $35 million a year, yeah, he's worth 35. The problem is Kevin Durant, when healthy, is probably worth 60. And LeBron is probably worth 55. And Giannis is worth 62. But they're all getting paid the same 35 as, pick your random true level max player. So what it did was it essentially we're talking about a sport in basketball where we know most of our success is tied to these handful of elite individuals. But because we are limited in how much we can pay them, and yet we still have to pay this money out due to the BRI split, we got all this extra money. So where am I going to give it? I'm going to give it to a bunch of dudes who are not worth it.
Who aren't worth it. That goes back to the conversation I had with Chris Wallace, where I remember asking him, why are teams doing this? And he said, quite simply, you got to pay somebody. This is what it costs. Yep. Mm-hmm. And because this is what it costs, you have essentially an extremely inflated marketplace that is also simultaneously depressed. Yeah. Because you can't pay the super guy what he's really worth. That a LeBron James, as we talk about this, you know, the legacy of the decision that we talk about these last 12 years, there's never been a guy in NBA history who's done what he's done in terms of whatever team I'm on, just me. My team's an NBA finalist. My team is championship material because nobody else ever got to exercise that level of flexibility, of freedom. I mean, if Michael Jordan switched 3 teams in 6 years, same thing, but he never did, right? Ditto for the rest of them who came before. But because of what he's been able to do, and I think this is part of the reason why this decade is so special, and why when we look at this period, we're going to look back at the decision as something significant to how these sports are run. Because what LeBron did do more than anything else is had control on so many other layers that the other players previously didn't. Michael Jordan had plenty of control on his team, but he still existed within a team format. And that is true even when you're talking about Nike and the sneakers and the Jordan brand and the whole thing. He did not take that separately. That's like a conversation on the road between him and Craig Hodges. Michael, you should be doing this on your own. You don't need Nike. You're bigger than Nike. I mean, that this is the legacy of all of this, that now you have a player, or you have players who believe that they've reached the point where they tip the balance.
Maybe we need to trace this all back to Oprah, right?
And you get a car. And you get a car.
Just like even her, you know, the age-old story of her not getting paid a salary to make the Oprah show, but having equity in its making.
That's right.
It feels like that is, you know, not that we can't go back to like even farther back examples of that, but it's even like, you know, paying so much attention to the Jordan years and thinking at the time, what more could one player own, right? Like, what more could be done? And then, exactly. And then LeBron gets to that next layer and that next layer. Because from like a fan perspective, watching Jordan in the 90s, you're like, all right, well, he owns X, he's got the Jordans, he's got this, he's got that. I guess he's got it all. And then LeBron's like, no, I can get to the next layer of this.
Let me throw one thing at you as we stay on topic here. One of my friends, and we were talking the other day about the Nets being in the play-in game as they're playing Cleveland on Tuesday. And one of the things he said, as we were talking about super teams and team building and roster manipulation, he's like, I know that the Nets had to do what they had to do. It was the smart move. But I liked what that team was doing beforehand with Dinwiddie and all those, and Allen and those guys. I liked what they were doing. As a fan, I would have ridden with that team longer than a Kevin Durant team swooping in, winning a championship, and just bolting. His point was this: there's no question that the Kyrie, Durant, Harden is the superior thing. But even after the Nets win the championship, what happens to that franchise? Does it stick when those guys leave? Or did they, so let's think about it instead of from a player standpoint, what did the team actually really get long term?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I know you've got plenty to say on this. I'll just jump in. I think that, Howard, that is kind of the heart of what we're talking about when we say, what effect did the decision have, right? Like Facebook wanted to connect people, but it also had a whole lot of side effects. What effect did the decision have? I think you were getting at a key piece of it, which is how do we want our teams to be built? Is it really just all I care about is playing for a title, or do I like the process of it? Because my dad would always say, when he would always talk about the Knicks back in like the like Gallinari, I can't believe I'm calling them the Gallinari years, but whatever time frame,
Felton.
Wilson Chandler, and he was like, I would have rather had them than that mega trade to get Carmelo in. He's like, I thought we were building something. I think we have lost sight of, maybe this is a theme of the Meadowlarkers when we talk about this, like the fans do like to go on a journey with the team as well. No, they don't.
He does not want to take that journey.
No, he doesn't want a journey.
What fans like more than
he wants a destination.
They like winning. They like winning. I guarantee your friend Howard and Kate, your father, had the Knicks, had it worked out and they won. Like, hell yeah. Like, same thing with the Lakers. Do you think there are people pining for Brandon Ingram and Julius Randle and Josh Hart? No. They won a championship. That's all it was about. That's why we do this.
It's a different story, though. That's different. Here's how it's different.
Everyone wants that. I get it.
But yes, but stay with me on this.
Yes.
I mean, stay with me on this, okay? The Los Angeles Lakers are a marquee, legendary, top of the NBA franchise. The New Jersey Piscataway 16W Brooklyn Nets are not, right? As Bob Ryan used to call them, the exit 16W Nets, right? The Brooklyn Nets are not. So the Lakers, you're always still going to be the Lakers. So when you ride and you win, you're still the Lakers. But when Kyrie Irving leaves the Nets and when Kevin Durant leaves the Nets, what are the Nets?
So let me give you an alternate example then. And I know that this example applies because at the time, this was an organization that hadn't won anything, hadn't done anything.
Spurs?
Let's take a trip down to go see our old friend, Dan Le Batard.
Right in Miami.
Down to 601
Heat culture.
Boulevard. Right? And heat culture and all that stuff. When it was Alonzo Mourning and Tim Hardaway, we were scrapping, we were fighting, and then it didn't work out, and then we're going to scrap and fight. We got Dwayne Wade. We just signed this kid, Lamar Odom. He's great. Caron Butler. He's maybe one of the best in his rookie class. Hey, we're really building something. Shaq, bring him over. Championship. Super Soakers. White Hot Heat. Nobody remembers shit about Caron Butler anymore. And now he's an assistant coach. Like, hey, I remember you. You used to play with the Wizards. What are you doing here? Yeah, I started my career here, if you guys remember. The reality is, fans, humans, we are designed, and probably for our own sanity, to make the best of whatever situation we're in. So when we're in a situation where we're chugging along and we are, pecking away at just this huge immovable object of granite, and like maybe it's just a little bit, we're going to erode and we'll get there soon. The reality is, no, you're never going to get there.
Yeah, but I don't love that analogy. I don't love that
analogy. Because the Heat are transitory anyway. The Heat aren't.
But I don't love that analogy for two reasons. Number one, as you shake your head before I say anything, right? Right? Number one, the Heat had Dwayne Wade, homegrown rock. He's the center of this whole thing. He's the center of 2006. He's the center to 2011. And Kevin Arnovitz wrote a good piece today on ESPN about the Nets and the Lakers this year. And he made this point as well, which is you still, if you're going to super team it, you still got to have a homegrown guy. And the Heat have that, and the Nets don't have that, which is my question. What happens to the core of the Nets if they're all mercenaries?
Can I give you the ultimate counterpoint?
Let me see. Can I guess it?
Guess it, please.
I'm asking if I can get. Can I guess it? The ultimate counterpoint. The ultimate counterpoint. I don't know. What is it?
Okay, so I have a lot of friends who are from this part of the world, right? And
what part of the world?
Long time fans of the sport and people who work for the organization and everything. I asked people in Toronto, would you have rather kept DeMar and Kyle Lowry together and just scraping away and almost getting there?
No. You take Kawhi.
Kawhi for 1 year. I said, was it worth it? Kawhi left.
Absolutely.
He's going to the Clippers. Was it worth it? And you know what they all say? Absolutely.
And I agree with that.
Absolutely. Because
I agree.
That is the ultimate mercenary. The dude came in, won you a championship. Thanks for the memories. Peace out. And
except he was traded.
Who? But no, the point, no, no, it's not whether how he got there. Again, you don't get caught in the semantics of how people got there. He wasn't smuggled across the border. The guy chose. He chose. He wanted to be traded to Toronto. He did his thing and he left. And the reality is this: I know we romanticize the notion of the built, not bought, and all that stuff. But the reality is, you know what we romanticize even more? A championship. And a championship always outweighs all those warm and fuzzy feelings. The only reason you would ever say the opposite is because you're not winning a championship. And so you have to make sense of your life right now. Why the hell am I rooting for these guys? Because I like that we are struggling and there's a beauty in the struggle. No, there isn't.
Except I will argue one thing. I will continue to argue this, is that we still haven't seen it. Because at the end of the day, even though, and I agree with your friends, absolutely. You get a chance to get Kawhi Leonard, you get Kawhi Leonard. It's just that simple. And especially
DeMar was that rock. DeMar was the fan favorite.
Lowry was the rock too. But you had Lowry there too.
At the time, Lowry's not.
It was DeMar's team, no question, but Lowry.
DeMar was the greatest Raptor in franchise history at the time he got traded.
Wasn't Vince Carter?
More than Vince Carter, more than Chris Bosh, more than Tracy McGrady, more than Damon Stoudemire. He
Ooh,
was what people said. That's the greatest player in franchise history.
Interesting. I'm gonna have to go to my Torontos and ask about this.
Now they'll say Lowry, but at the time it was DeMar.
Yeah. Well, and once again, like, we still have not seen the team with no homegrowners show up and win. I just wondered what the Nets. I mean, okay. And here's the other piece when we're talking about, like, to stay on topic here, we're talking about this sort of 12 years of who's in control. And where I disagree with you on this, Amin, is the idea that that it's simply semantics. I don't think it's really totally semantics, because somebody is making something happen, right? So no matter who it is, whether it's the GM, whether it's Magic Johnson forcing his way into, or Kobe Bryant forcing his way to Los Angeles, whatever it is, somebody is making something happen. Okay, agreed, no doubt about that. But where I do think it does matter is the fact that you have a group of players now where it feels a bit more rudderless. Maybe we're just saying that the Brooklyn Nets are a rudderless franchise because they've never really had anything. Maybe that's what it is. Maybe maybe the thing is with professional sports that there are certain teams that just don't have more than what they are because, right? And then there are other franchises that have that great franchise history and they can create it, and that's how it's going to be. Like, there's always going to be someone who loses, and you're not going to get that parity. But it does feel that this postseason in the last couple of years, that there is a model that players and teams have both been trying to follow. And it is sort of an outgrowth of what LeBron did in 2010, whether it was the Celtics saying, we got to get Kyrie, and if we get Kyrie, then Kyrie can land AD, and none of them were going to go to Boston. It wasn't going to happen. It was not going to happen, and now look at what the Celtics are doing now. Now you've got two homegrown guys. You've got Jaylen Brown and you've got Jason Tatum, and they're great. And so, but something is happening here where it's more than semantics, because you do have the players are moving the pieces of the chessboard more than they ever have.
Yep.
Kate, you want to pivot right here?
Oh, yeah. Are you down with that, Howard?
Oh, yeah, I'm done.
Yep. Yeah, I think one of the questions I was asking in advance of this was, as we're paying attention to the NCAA portal, both in basketball and in football, there's a whole lineage of NCAA, but it's hard to separate the legacy of the decision and the player empowerment and all of the aftershocks of the decision. It's hard to separate that from what we're seeing now with the NCAA. Like, even though we're talking about two separate entities, all of sports are connected, especially when, like, even like a simple example, when you hear someone like Michael Phelps or DeMar DeRozan, I mean, you just mentioning him, talk about mental health, that has effects in other sports at other levels because of the interconnectedness. And the transfer portal and what we're seeing now feels like the most blatant descendant of not just the decision, but if we're pinpointing the decision as like the catalyst of like a long lineage of player empowerment, That's directly tied to LeBron and storytelling and ownership and all of that.
Well, no question. Well, one of the most important things of this time period, it goes back to what we were saying before. Absolutely. In 1969, Curt Flood gets traded to Philadelphia, and he's like, why do I have to go to Philadelphia? I've been here 12 years. Don't I have a say in where I go? And that led to the 10-5 rule, where if you were 10 years and 10 years in the league, 5 on the same team, then you had control. You had a say as free agency moved on. Your point, Kate, about this is absolutely spot on in terms of now that we are listening. Who are we listening to? And if we're going to listen to the players, because the players have more agency now than before, now the player wants to talk about their mental health. So now we listen. And now we're telling different stories. And now we're saying different things. And now we're framing our stories through different lenses instead of just the old top-down, your wife's having a baby, I don't care, you're a gamer. Now it's go spend time with your family, right? All these things change along a similar line. And it is, okay, you could make an argument that eventually we were all going to get here, but these things do get pushed in this direction. Is it more humane now simply because we've evolved? No. It's more humane now because those players had agency and there were different moments where the pressure shifted and you had to relent.
It's going back to what we started with, just Dabo Swinney's remark that this is chaos, and it's funny because it is so blatantly apparent the issue he has with it, and the issue he has is that he no longer lords over the futures.
That's right.
Athletes. I think that's something.
He's an overseer, and he's not going to be an overseer that much longer if it keeps going in this direction. And the reason why these guys love college sports is because they control. There's only one thing in college sports that remains, and it's the coach.
And it's crazy because there's two types of control, right? There's the control of I can't be forced to do anything I don't want to do as a coach, right? I want to play this guy. I don't want to play this guy. I want to play this system. I don't want to play that system. There is no input coming up. Everything is downhill. So there's that control. But there's another more insidious control, I believe, that they get off on. And that's the control of letting these kids know your whole life is in my hands and I can crush it just like that. And what the transfer portal does, it doesn't necessarily remove that first piece of control that I mentioned. They still run the systems they want, play who they want to play. But what they can't do anymore is lord over the students and be like, if you don't comply with the way I want to do things, I will crush you and I will end your career and end your education and end all these other things. It's the part that people bring up every single time when we talk about, well, scholarship is compensation. Not when they can pull it just because you got hurt.
That's right. Not only in its 1 year renewables, 100%. Right. One of the things about this with the portal, especially when it comes to women's sports, that I find really interesting as this plays out, is the dual hypocrisy or the dual contradiction of, we were talking the last time about villains and about UConn and about UConn dominating. And now, maybe we're going to start seeing South Carolina be the next great team, or Stanford return to being the next great team. Or maybe it's going to be UConn in the next 10 years. Who knows? But what I don't see, what I'm going to be interested to see how this plays out, is that when you have the transfer portal give you the opportunity for parity, all the people bitching about UConn being too good, are they also embracing the portal? Saying, here's an opportunity for parity. Use it. Embrace it. The same way, in a lot of ways, Coach K talked about dumping on one and done and then suddenly became the king of one and done, right? You're going to have to adapt. And so it will, I'm curious to see if the anti-UConns and the anti-women's basketball dynasty people are pro-portal, or if they just want to control as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, you can't speak for everybody, but I would say, in keeping my eye on the women's basketball world, it does seem to be a place where people are embracing it a little bit more than the college football one. There's less to lord over. There's less of a lineage of lording over in women's college basketball. And it does seem like a place where, sure, it's going to go the other way every once in a while. There will be young women on the portal who maybe end up at UConn. But more than anything, I think it's going to open up a different flow, which is I thought I needed to be here for the big splashy thing.
That's right.
But it might actually be better for who I am to be elsewhere. And there was lots of barriers to that before. But one other part of this that I am less sort of 100% gung-ho about, and they're tied together, is NIL. Not that I'm not gung-ho, that I don't think that kids should be able to make money off of it. But the one part that I'm a little wary of is like, if we're tying some of this back to the decision, what's good for LeBron when he's 25 years old with a whole team around him, with brand image likeness, is not always good for an 18-year-old to have to think about their brand, their image, and their likeness. I mean, there's so many kids I have talked to about brand and brand building when they're in high school, whether athlete or not, both athlete and non-athlete. The ability to build your brand and the idea that you should be building your brand is a thing kids are thinking about when they're 13 or 14. It's the reason that some kids have an Instagram and then they also have a Finstagram where they actually put up their real photos, because they know Instagram is like a resume. Instagram is the thing that people will check when they're applying to colleges or applying to jobs. And, you know, a Finsta is like their real expression of self. So there is a part of me that's like, if this is a direct descendant, this, you know, the NIL, there is some chaos around it. There is some impact on kids having to think of themselves as brands much earlier than I think you should probably ever be having to think of yourself as a brand. And there's very little infrastructure in place beyond agents who have a different set of
agreed.
So,
but you also got to you also have to let it breathe. And when I read Dabo's comments and I read that story, I thought it was total horseshit. And the reason why I thought so was because, one, how can you even make a determination about NIL right now? It's not even 5 years old. It's brand new. It's completely new. You have no idea. And if you're talking, when he talks about the kids being the people who are going to be the ultimate losers here, what effect does it have on a kid that your coach is making $8.5 million a year? He's got a shoe contract and you all have to wear the shoe of his deal. You're putting money in his pocket and you got nothing to say. What does that do to the effect on a student and on your team and on everything else? And like in the 1980s and 90s when the basketball coaches were getting those shoe deals and all of a sudden everybody who played in North Carolina had to wear Nikes, right? I mean, all of these different things have effect. And I agree with you, I mean, where you're saying that, you know, what he's really saying is, this is slipping away from me a little bit.
I agree with, sorry, I mean, I'm just quickly, like, I think we're talking about two different college experiences here, because all of the conversations we ever have about this, where 99% of them are about football, men's basketball, and like a little
about the
bit
big
about
revenue
UConn.
And star player stuff.
Yes, and that's such the tip of the iceberg to the college experience that goes untalked about, that gets impacted in other various ways by. I mean, I'm not saying I'm for name, image, likeness. But I do think that the unregulated unruliness of it is affecting other sports in a way that we don't yet see. And I can't articulate what that is, because like you said, Howard, it's, what is it, or what are we in, like 2 years right now? I mean, we have no idea what this is going to be. It is the wild, wild west, and I have to think it will settle down and there will be a place we land where it makes much more sense.
Well,
go ahead, Amin.
A couple of things. One is, again, we worry about what it'll do to 18 and 19-year-olds, but we never had those worry about tennis players or golf players who are doing this at a much younger age, and it's super commonplace, right? And then second of all, I think ultimately, that's part of life, right? That's part of why we live in the country we live in, which is there are some things where people are going to be allowed to fuck up. Yeah. Oh, this kid got all this money from the local car dealership and didn't pan out and his whole career is ruined. Like, that's life. There are people who ruin their careers because they got a DUI. There are people who ruin their careers because they just never were really committed to working. There are people who ruin their careers. Or
they were the top 5-star recruit and flamed out. They weren't as good as they were supposed to be.
Right. Like, it happens for a bunch of reasons. I never have a problem like, wait, what if they ruin their life with this money? Well, like, well, at least they got the money, because there's any number of ways they could have ruined their life without it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Final thoughts, folks. I mean, I love this conversation for a bunch of reasons, and we could probably have a part 2 and part 3 at some point, because we are in a new territory. I mean, however we want to frame it, there's new stuff happening here. And we are going to, when you think about history and you think about time, you do think about those intersections. Where did you see things change? Where did things go right when they could have gone left? And we're going to be talking about the decision over years and the different effects that it had. And the appropriate thing to do, obviously, is to think about it in terms of a step along the larger story, no question. But absolutely, for this generation over the last 12 years, we've been looking at something special.
Yeah. No, I mean, final thoughts are only like some of the things we've brought up here. I mean, at least I've brought up like Facebook. There's all kinds of unintended consequences to the original idea of like connecting people wherever you are. And I think when
or
we talk
a website
about,
to rate girls.
Right. Yeah. Facebook, the whatever the one at Harvard was called. Well, anyway, we won't go that
right.
in.
I don't know.
It had a different name. Didn't it have a different name than
It did. I forgot.
Facebook?
I got to go
I'm
watch
not
the
gonna get
movie
caught up on
again.
that.
It was the Facebook.
But I do think that it's easy to sit here and be like, okay, well, all of these things happening in college sports, they lead to more player empowerment. They lead to more money in the hands of people who haven't been able to get that money. Like, this should be universally good. I am really, like, when we do Meadowlarkers 7,000 in 2032 and we look back, what will we think of? When we look at the portal opened up, holy shit, that completely exploded college football. It created a minor league, and we no longer had college football in its current iteration. Like, there will be these kind of offshoots.
Oh man.
Final thoughts, Amin?
Yeah, I think some of this stuff is very helpful and is a good evolution, and some of this stuff is, I think, fear mongering over what we fear it might mean. And the Dabo Swinney loss of control through the portal system, not necessarily control of how he runs his operation, but the idea that he doesn't have the part where he gets to wield power over people and basically give them the implication that you have to stay in line, is not unlike what's happened with free agency or player movement, I should say. In
That's right.
That you still have a lot of freedom. I wholeheartedly reject the idea that teams aren't built by front offices, that coaches aren't coaching. I think all that is happening. I've seen it happen. I've been to practices. I see people get coached and be challenged and all those things. I think the big thing is really the implication that I can ruin your career. You'll be done. No one will ever hear from you again. That's the part that's gone. That's the part that keeps teams and front offices and owners up at night, right? That I don't have the ability to bully my way into getting my way. I do have to cooperate, or else I will lose said talent. And I think for the most part, that's a good thing. But that doesn't mean that we've let go of the steering wheel and say, well, the players are running it now. That's one of the things that irritates me more than anything when I'm looking at what's happened to the Lakers and how they've gone to tubes and how everyone said, well, it's not Rob Pelinka's fault. This is what LeBron wanted. It's like, no, you get paid a lot of millions of dollars, Rob Pelinka, to have an influence on those decisions.
Well, let us not forget that in 1975, after the Seitz decision gave baseball free agency, the Clark Griffith Jr., the owner of the Minnesota Twins, said, "This is the end of the sport as we know it." And in that case, he was right, but it was not the end of the sport. Baseball, they all been making more money than they've ever made before. Everybody's life is better. The sport is better. It's all better across all sports. That, my friends, was Meadowlarkers 27. We will see you all next week. Thank you.